We believe that you are strong by design, and you were made in God's image to have a strong body, mind, and spirit. You're listening to the #1 Strength and Health Authority podcast in the world. So let's get ready to unlock your potential and transform your life in today's episode. Happy New Year! Happy 2023 on the Strong by Design podcast. So great to have you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining me, Coach Chris Wilson, hosting today. And this is a very special first episode of the new year, our most memorable moments of 2022. Always fun to look back on some of the most powerful, most compelling, most outrageous conversations that we had last year. We had many of them. We had over 50 episodes. But what we did was we wanted to highlight the ones that went kind of above and beyond, whether it was the guest or the topic at hand. And so this is a fun chance for me to kind of showcase really what this podcast is all about. In a more or less a 1-hour episode gives you a total overview of what Strong by Design is all about. So thank you to our past listeners, our return listeners, for coming back for more here on Strong by Design. Always so great to have you. It's so encouraging to have people coming back for more. And to all of our new people, if you've just landed on this podcast for the very first time, welcome to our show. You are strong by design, and we absolutely believe that. That's why we make this show. We make this show because it's so much fun for us. It's such a growth opportunity for us as hosts, and I say us because it's not just me hosting this show. We have other great team members that take part in this, and so please go back and listen to past episodes to get to know us a little bit better. And we release a new episode every single week here on Strong by Design on Wednesdays. So looking forward to a brand new year of powerful, life-changing, and transformative conversations. So with that being said, let's roll right into what I consider to be one of our most emotional and most powerful conversations of the year that I got to have with a very special content provider here at Strong by Design by the name of Jo Miller. And she did an episode with me earlier last year called An Unbreakable Bond for Life. Grab your tissues wherever you are, because this is powerful. Here you go, episode 217, An Unbreakable Bond for Life.
We had a very traumatic childhood with lots of pain and suffering, but in the midst of that, we had sports, and that became such a great escape. And it was a world where we could dream that anything was possible, because most of our lives growing up, we were told we couldn't do this, couldn't do that, you're too small, too weak. No one in the family is that athletic, and you'll never amount to much. Whether it was a variety of people that said it, but it just gave us more fuel to say, you know what, we're going to prove others wrong. What really made a big change was when our uncle in New York said, if you're going to come here every summer, you're going to have to learn martial arts. And we were 8 years old, and he was like the Italian version of Mr. Miyagi. And we said, wow, we would love to learn. He wouldn't let us enter the dojo until we had trained for a year with just him. And he would have us do hundreds of punches in a horse stance where your legs are just shaking. And we would be so tired, but we didn't want to say anything. And I'd be so sore that putting the sheet on over me to go to sleep at night hurt my muscles. He wasn't overdoing it, but he just saw that we had so much more potential, and we didn't want to tap out. So if he said to do it, we did it. And then once he felt like we had just gotten enough of the basics where we could enter the dojo, then he allowed us in. But we were the only white belts and only girls. So it was very intimidating. It was all these men, a lot of police officers, people in the military. They were black belts or 3rd degree, 4th degree on up. And it was such a great experience. It taught us a lot about mental toughness and pushing through. And then when we went home and life was very difficult, we carried ourselves so differently that the bullies stopped bullying us. We were able to stand up for ourselves. And then it also helped with sports. We had bad vision, but doing the martial arts and then the surgeries that we had helped correct some of those problems that led to us struggling at first with sports. And then the kids that were the least likely to ever play sports, we went on to play 3 varsity sports in high school, softball in college, and then I went on to competing in powerlifting and strongman. After my twin sister was diagnosed and went through her cancer journey, as she called it, blessed cancer, when she eventually found her ultimate healing in heaven, it was devastating. We were 33 at the time, and Sorry.
It's okay. I get it.
I remember thinking life moving forward was going to be impossible, that it would be the hardest thing I had ever faced, which was saying a lot. And I remember one day driving home from work and thinking and praying to God, I don't know how I'm going to make it. And then I remembered my twin and how she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Sorry. And how that was an impossible journey to face, but she faced it with so much faith and strength and positivity. And it just, all of a sudden, it gave me the strength, like, if she can face that, she taught me everything I needed to know to face this with great faith. And I remember feeling really guilty, because it felt unfair that I was still living. And I struggled with that. And actually, the first year, it was really hard for me to work out. I felt like she had been bedridden and would have given anything to walk, to run, to lift weights. And I got to do so much, and I had so much more. And I was so healthy. And I was feeling like it was not fair, but then I was praying, and I felt like God told me, what are you going to say to your sister when you see her one day in heaven? And she asks you, so what did you do with all that extra time? And that just struck me so much. And from that moment on, it was still hard, but I pushed myself. I thought, I'm going to live for both of us. I want to make as many memories as possible so that when I get to heaven, I'll have so much to share with her. We'll have so much to talk about, and she'll be so grateful that I didn't waste that time.
All right. Very, very good. And let's get right into it with what I found to be one of our more embarrassing or humorous episodes of the year. Was a conversation between Mike Westerdal, founder of Critical Bench, and Jared Hailey, our kind of on-site pastor / videographer and photographer. He's an amazing guy. And they had a terrific conversation based on a book that we have all read here about being offended in this day and age. Episode 254, I'm offended that you're offended.
We had a dinner in a private room, and one of the waiters wound up leaving the dinner and didn't want to work and wouldn't come back the next day. And he heard someone at the table I was sitting at, someone had pointed at him and said that he looks like our friend Bedros Keuilian. Mm-hmm. He's the author of the book Man Up. He's a friend. He's a business mentor. And someone just said, "Oh, he reminds me of Bedros." Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how that was offensive. Maybe he knows Bedros and was offended by it.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't like his message. I don't know.
Maybe he probably has no idea who Bedros was, but I don't think he really knew what we were saying, but maybe he heard or felt like someone looking at him or talking about him.
Yeah.
To the point that he left work and wouldn't come back the next day. And
All
really,
of a sudden so your waiter just switched in the middle of the night.
oh yeah, he was done. He walked out. And it was only like 2 or 3 total working that night. This is at like a nice hotel for business meetings and stuff.
How did you know he walked out? Did you just all of a sudden notice
because
he wasn't
because
around
they
anymore?
went and talked to the group leader and told them that he was offended and he was uncomfortable and was leaving.
Okay.
So then they asked us what happened, and it became a big thing. So it was talked about. That was like the first experience. The next night, after dinner, which was off-site from the hotel, we stopped up at the rooftop bar before turning in for the night, and there was a group of people up there, and one girl that asked like where I was from, and I just said Florida, and I think I had an American flag T-shirt on or something.
How dare you?
Yeah, and right away she really just started ranting about Florida, everything she can't stand about Florida, all the problems, and we don't got to get into all the politics, but there's strong feelings about Florida one way or the other.
Yeah.
You either love it or hate it. It's kind of like Trump, right? It's like people can't stand him or they really like him. There's not a lot of people that are just like, whatever. I feel like Florida's kind of getting like that a little bit.
Yep.
And the way I chose to respond, I had a good conversation earlier in the night, just listening to a Navy SEAL friend of mine who's a black man, and we were talking about racism and kind of things he'd experienced or not experienced, how he looked at it, and really just listening to him and not talking, I felt like I learned a lot. And then when I went to this, I was like, I'm not going to like argue with her. I feel like that would just confirm all these biases or ideas that she had about me already. It's like, oh, white Christian guy from Florida. I know what he's all about. Like, what am I going to do? Start like arguing with her and like just prove everything true that she already thinks about me? So I just listened, and then I did have some counterpoints later on, but it was in a calm kind of way, more in a question format after listening to her. And it kind of diffused the whole thing. And one of the other people, one of her friends was like, I really like how you handled that. That was really good. And I was like, oh, thanks. And then I just said, excuse me, I got to go to the restroom, and left and went to bed.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, whether we're the person who is offended or we're the person on the other side who did the offending, when that seems to erupt, we no longer are thinking about what is the end result that I want. Right, where we get into this mode, it's almost like that competitive nature comes out of us, where you just want to win. You want to know that I bested you, or that I win the argument. And I think it's important for us when we are thinking through how do we respond when we personally are offended. It's not me coming and attacking you as a person. It's the end result is I want you to hear me. I want you to understand my perspective, and I want us to actually be friends at the end of it. Where a lot of people, I don't think that that's necessarily the goal. That it's hard to not be it's hard to be unoffendable when you're not looking at the big picture. You're just kind of looking at it in the heat of the moment.
All right, terrific. And what I thought, we had some controversial and or timely, trending type conversations in 2022. But this one I thought was extra special. It was a conversation that I was fortunate to have with a new friend of the podcast, Dr. Annette Bosworth. We had a 2-part episode. Episode 219 and episode 220 released on 2 different days. Boost your brain and bust cancer with keto. Get ready for some really cool insights from Dr. Boz.
And then there's a patient one day that changed my whole practice. She had been diagnosed with cancer of her white blood cells. The cancer was treated appropriately with all the right medical things. We're now 10 years into her journey, and we've had 2 rounds of chemotherapy. I I cared about her, so that it's very well documented that everything was done correctly. She had the best healthcare Western medicine could offer. And she's coming back to see me, and there's the time right before you see the physician, you check the white blood cells to see how well her cancer is doing. But you can see as she walks in that there's lymph nodes in her neck and her armpit, and she looks like a zombie. She doesn't look alive. She looks gray. She's like, that's not healthy. That's not good. You don't need to be a doctor to see that. And during these last 6 months before she had come, I was a little ticked off, actually. There was a national security secret. For national security purposes, the data on what a ketogenic diet can do for brains was allowed to be used by the physicians that were taking care of our NASA astronauts or by the team that ran the Navy SEALs, because apparently their brains were more important than the rest of the country. But for us lowly, normal physicians, not with that access, that data was kept a national security secret. So that data came out in 2015 or 2014, and I heard a podcast between Tim Ferriss and Dom D'Agostino. He was not misspeaking, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, there's no way that I am this good at what I do and not know that that a ketogenic diet should be the base part of what I was doing in this brain care. I actually closed the clinic, which I got a syndrome, which I work a little too hard. Closing the clinic was like, I don't know how I'm going to make payroll next month, but we are closing the clinic while I go to the library. I'm going to read everything I can find on the ketogenic diet. And this was probably about 3 months after that, because I kept like taking time to say, if I'm going to read something, I'm going to do it on this ketogenic diet. And the more I read, I'm like, I can't be, it gives me goosebumps to think about it, because I'm like, it can't be true.
Wow.
So now we are, I've read a few things on cancer, and I'm just curious enough to get my hair to wrinkle. And now I'm trying to make a ketone. Like, okay, maybe I should try this diet. Like, and I can't make a ketone come out of me. Like, what the heck? What am I doing wrong? So this is about a month later that this patient comes in. So this is chronic lymphocytic leukemia. So this is the white blood cell cancer. And she, okay, if it's doubling every 6 weeks, we have to do chemotherapy again. We got to kill. It's dividing so fast. We're going to have to hit it again. And her numbers are skyrocketed. They're awful. And the lymph nodes are visible, under the turtleneck. You can see them. It's like you're a mess. And she said, no, I'm not doing chemotherapy. I choose to, this is not the life I signed up for. Your approach isn't working. And I absolutely I'm not doing chemotherapy again. The last time I went through chemotherapy, I forgot how to use a sewing machine, and I made all of my children's clothes until they were 10 years old. So that's a hard one to fight against. Like, okay, yeah, my medicine isn't doing very good. And it's this moment of silence where a patient doesn't ask this very often. And she asks, if it was you, what would you do? It still brings emotion because it was such an intimate moment. Patients ask it all the time, but don't usually pause to enter the space that is that intimate, because it hurts. And are standing there with the pink slip saying chemotherapy, and one hall leads to the oncology place to set up the test, and the other one's the front door. And I said, I would walk out that front door, and I would do something completely different than chemotherapy. And the patient was my mother. And she cried, and I cried, and I walked out the door and said, Mom, do you really trust me to do this? And she said, of course I do, kind of flippantly. I'm like, no, I mean with your whole life. And she goes, it's better than what they've been doing. So we walked out the front door. Our little farm is 100 miles away from that hospital. We get in the same car, leave one in the parking lot, and I start saying things like, Mom, have you ever heard of a ketone? What's that? Like, well, it's this unit of fuel, like glucose, except it's better.
All right. What is undoubtedly our most popular and most downloaded, because I have the proof, episode of the year of 2022 was actually a part 2 episode 3 years later. We had a good friend of the show's, Frank Rich, back in to do part 2, episode 213, The Truth About Porn. Frank and Mike and I sat down, had a great conversation, and get ready. This is some really, really powerful conversation.
If a guy is truly committed and he's ready to end his battle or get pornography out of his life once and for all, the only thing that would lead him to slipping or returning back to it would be one of two things. He's either lacking character traits, just certain ability to do the things that are necessary to live without pornography. And that's not a judgment of somebody's character, because character traits aren't something that you're naturally born with. You may have innate tendencies to lean towards a more disciplined character. You may have more tendency to lean towards certain character traits like willpower, so forth. But a lot of that is stuff that has to be developed over time, which is what we do within our program. So you'll slip or relapse or fall back into your old pattern of behavior due to lack of character traits or the lack of self-belief in and of yourself. And I think this is probably where most men sit, because if you've maybe recognized that porn has been a problem in your life, you've probably said, I'm done with this now, I'm never going to go back. And you've probably made that promise to yourself. The guys listening right now, a dozen, maybe 24 times, maybe 100 times. A guy is out there, he's like, you know what, I've said this before, and then they find themselves 2 days later, sitting in a secret corner in their house, laptop, late night, whatever it is. So what ends up happening with that, though, is because you've said, I'm going to stop, and then you keep returning back, now your confidence in yourself or the self-belief that you can actually achieve this has been completely shattered. And that's the biggest hurdle that I'm facing with the vast majority of the men that we're working, is they just don't believe that they can live without it.
The desire is there, but they don't believe it in the sustainability of their desires.
Yeah, because they're attaching.
They've failed so many times.
Yeah, they're attaching something that is pure neuroscience and is caused by their brain to what they are associating to their sexual needs or their sexual desires. And I think we need to separate them and understand that this pull is coming from behaviors and decisions and programming of ourself that is leading us to need a chemical hit, not something that we need sexually. The act of watching pornography and having real intimacy or real sex with your wife or partner are two different things, and they're two different behaviors. The brain and body respond completely separate. But I think the problem happens is when guys begin to say, oh, I have a high sex drive, so I need to watch a lot of pornography. Or I have these certain desires that were given to me, or I was born with these certain needs and tendencies and things that kind of intrigue me and turn me on. So I need to seek out pornography because my wife won't do these things with me. So we need to understand that in today's conversation, hopefully what we can do is separate them. I'm not here to tell you, that you shouldn't have internal desires. Like, it's a part of human nature. It's a part of what makes men. Lust is on our heart. It's something that we're all going to battle with for the rest of our lives. But the need for pornography, the need for a hit of dopamine in your brain, almost like you're going to get from cocaine, is not something they're going to be able to justify to me that you really need. What do you need to do? You need to be aware of your thoughts. You need to be attention to what the content is that you're consuming. You need to have some type of gratitude practice. You need to be doing some type of service, because pornography is one of the most selfish behaviors that you're ever going to take part in. You're sitting down by yourself privately, consuming other human beings, other individuals, for your own short-term instant gratification pleasure. If you can't tell me that that's not selfish, then I don't know what your definition of selfish really is. So you've molded and created and wired yourself, bringing neuroscience in again, at the neuroscience level, what wires together what fires together wires together. So over the time, you begin to condition yourself that humans are objects of internal pleasure, short-term gratification for me. So how does that manifest in your everyday relationships? Humans become objects of pleasure, and pleasure doesn't have to be masturbation and ejaculation. Pleasure can be like, what is Mike going to do for me today? What is Chris? What am I going to get out of Chris that's going to make my life better? So you begin to kind of see people as objects for your own disposal.
And it's easily justified by people because I'm not hurting anybody. Just me, not hurting anybody. And that's what a lot of people do with these addictions, these issues, these things that they have that they do in the dark that they wouldn't want to be caught doing. But they think, well, it's not how bad is it? No one's getting hurt on the other end of it.
Yeah, now you're entering into a whole different, parallel of the conversation. I know you guys had Natasha on from Redefining Refuge. You may believe or you may think that what you're consuming is 100% consensual, but the fact of the truth and the reality there is small percentage of that is true consenting. I mean, even in the produced videos, there's girls that are there doing things that they're not happy with. I've had former porn stars on my podcast, and it's like, they begin to look at sex as transactional. The amount of drugs and alcohol and greed and just evil that's going on behind the scenes.
And oddly enough, this one totally off the radar for me because I was not part of the conversation. But when going back and looking at how many downloads and how popular this episode was, I classified it as most bizarre or strange behavior conversation because this episode 212 released early in 2022 was about the top 10 mistakes that candidates make during the interview process. Out of all these different conversations we've had, people were very curious, very interested in this. And so this is fun. This is a conversation between Mike Westerdal and our executive assistant here at Critical Bench, Samantha Harrison. Check this out.
Be early, ideally. We have a lot of people who show up, a minute late or 5 minutes late. We had some people show up 40 minutes late. Just be early, know where you're going ahead of time. Make sure you have gas in your car. Make sure you have everything that you need in order to get to where you need to be early.
Very early.
Yes.
So I remember after college when I was applying, I would drive to the place the night before just to make sure I knew where I was going, just to be extra prepared. But give yourself some extra time. There could be some traffic that you're not used to. Right. Maybe it's a little tricky finding the building.
Right.
We give specific instructions, but still, you might take a couple wrong turns and have to do a U-turn or get stuck at another light. What's the big problem if you get there a little early? Go get a coffee or something after you found the place.
Right.
Just get there early. And then some people really just what's the big deal? Mm-hmm. Well, the big deal is just respect for other people's time. And this isn't a trick. We put in our process, be on time, because it's one of our values that we don't deviate from. Mm-hmm. So being a minute late or 5 or more automatically eliminates people from the job. Also, this is the dating phase. You're showing up for an interview. This is probably the best it's going to get. Mm-hmm. So if you're already late the first time we met, I'm pretty much thinking it's just going to be downhill from there. Right. You're going to get comfortable and slide more, and being late for meetings, holding people up, right. wasting people's time. Right. So for us, that's a huge flag, and I think it's the same for a lot of people. So give yourself the extra time, plan for gas, find the building, give yourself extra time to get ready, mm-hmm. and just get there early. Talking too much. These are going to be people that just ramble on and mm-hmm. go off in tangents. You've got a question, answer that question. That's fine. Be thorough, tell a story, do what you need to do, but right. don't go off on a side tangent, on a side story that has nothing to do right. with what you're asked, and now you're eating up all this time. Mm-hmm. There's usually a time period allotted for these things, and then there's right. someone else coming in. So, yep. And then people feel, I don't know, how did you feel when this happened?
It really honestly drained all of my energy, and I had no interest in continuing on with this particular interview. It's just draining. You answered the question, but now we're off 40 years ago into some, distant land that you wandered into. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. Why are we here?
Right. And we call it oversharing. Yeah. Sometimes. And, our personalities are similar. We kind of mm-hmm. get drained a little bit by just too much talking for no reason about nothing. Right. Yep. Just yep. Especially where there's a purpose to the meeting right. of what you're trying to do. Just trying to stay on track. Yep. It's the podcast can go off on tangents, and somebody's got to get reeled back in and get back on track. So, go ahead and answer the question, but try not to go off on side tangents. All right. What's the one question that we ask that has a very high percentage chance of people just kind of divulging the wrong information that mm-hmm. sends up a red flag?
Where do you see yourself in 5 years? This gets a lot of different answers.
It does. And it's one that might want to think about this one before you go in. It's a pretty common one, I think. And, we're trying to figure out, do you have any ambition? Like, are you looking to kind of start at this position, but you'd like to, kind of move up in the company? Are you looking for more responsibility? Are you looking to grow and learn? Or, is this exactly what you want to do and you'll be happy staying in this spot forever? Or are you just using this for some other scheme you've got in mind?
Right.
So the answer that really throws us for a loop are when people say, oh, in 5 years, I'll be moving to Texas and running my own t-shirt company, and my husband will be out of the military, and we're planning on going here. And I'm like, okay, so you want us to hire you, spend all our time and resources and money on training you up, teach you how to do the job, and then right by the time you're finally like profitable for us, now you're done and you're already got it planned out that you're moving and doing this other thing.
Right. Like, cool story, bro. Next.
Right.
I was fortunate enough to be introduced to this man from our friend Frank Rich. He had been on his podcast, and I said, please intro me to him because I would love to have him on Strong by Design to talk about this particular topic. And I was honored to have Chris McKenna from Protect Young Eyes on our podcast to talk about this online world and our young boys and girls. And so the most concerning and alarming conversation, episode 218, Protecting Young Eyes Online with Mr. Chris McKenna.
From 2009 to 2016, Chris, that's when everybody started carrying the internet with them. Right? Now parents are asking different questions. They're asking me about new apps. Imagine a world when Snapchat was new and Instagram was new. And that consulting background in me was like, well, this seems like a problem to be solved. I loved solving business problems. That's what God kind of wired me to do. And so I just simply started a little Facebook group, and I was doing research. And kind of at the same time, I had my own early childhood exposure to pornography back when I was age 8. Carried that into adulthood, back in the 90s when Al Gore invented the internet, then everything sort of broke loose. And now, guys like me who had that early two-dimensional magazine exposure, now we have this unlimited capability to look at whatever we want. I don't have to sneak down to the dude's house down the street to get a periodic glimpse. It's now on a computer in my dorm room. Are you kidding me? So that unleashed an issue in my life that I got stuck in. And so I have these things kind of all colliding sort of at the same time. I'm starting to wrestle with my own issue with a group of guys using Covenant Eyes and accountability, saying, hey, we have got to get rid of this issue of pornography. And at the same time, parents are saying, all this technology my kids are, being exposed to, how do I understand it? And so I just started tackling it from both sides and having conversations at our church. That led to the creation of a website, protectyoungeyes.com, back in 2015. And from there, it's really just kind of grown into what it is today, which is creating with family schools and churches, helping them create safer digital spaces with a lot of education, working in schools with a lot of talks, hundreds of presentations all over the country, but then also trying to change the laws, which really do not adequately protect our children today. Nothing on the books today, is any newer than about 20 years old when it comes to protecting our kids online. Therefore, it does not protect our kids online. So we have awesome families, like yours and mine and others, listeners, right, who are trying their best to protect our kids. And then we have technologies being created by organizations that care nothing about our children, nothing about them. So we want to stand in that gap. I was a 79-pound 8th grader who fit inside of every locker in the middle school that I attended, right? I only know that maybe because I kind of know that. And so what I'm saying is, when you and I were growing up back in the 80s, there were a lot of places that a tormented middle schooler could find refuge in, right? Getting off of a bus kind of meant they couldn't get to you anymore because I was in a big family. And so the only way to harass me would have been to call, and that was attached to the wall, right? There wasn't any way to get to me. So things sort of simmered down. The weekend was another spot where things kind of simmered down. You'd have an issue at the football game on Friday night, and by the time you got to school on Monday, things had mostly simmered down. Same thing for the summer. I don't know about you, but growing up in a small town in central Michigan like I did, I feel like everybody kind of came back in the fall a little more friendly with each other. Like the summertime was like this beautiful reset for whatever drama or cliques or problems were going on in June when you left. And you all sort of showed back up as friends, and then the popularity engine revved back up again. My point in saying this is that all of the things that used to bring relief to young people are now all of the things that bring continued torment to young people today, because that's when things get shared. That's when things go viral. That's when my worst moments get magnified, is sitting on mattresses in bedrooms all night long with this supercomputer that I've been given. And so again, it's a call to empathy to know that for certain young people, there are very few safe places. And to be honest, for that tormented young person, sometimes that phone, be it a different persona in a video game or maybe a fake account on social media, is the only relief that they get from the real world.
Time for a bit of a hardcore conversation. The most badass guy we had, without question, on the 2022 Strong by Design podcast was the one and only Larry Yatch. He is a U.S. Navy SEAL. He is a terrific leader, and he's a guy that I just really enjoyed getting to talk to. And so I classified this as the most badass hardcore episode, and I wanted you to be able to just listen in from a Navy SEAL what his life was like in BUD/S. Check this out.
The chow hall where you eat is about 1.5 miles from where you do most of the training. So you have to run as a class every day to and from 3 meals a day. So that's 9 miles just running to and from eating, much less anything else you're doing, right? You probably average 12 to 14 miles a day. And that running isn't fast because you're running as a class, but you're still having to run. You're not walking. And that jog, like they often make it so that you're either going to be late or you're going to be missing part of the class. Like only half the class can run at a fast pace to get you there on time. So if you get there on time, you're missing part of the class. If you get there as a complete class, you're going to be late. So no matter what, you're going to lose. And it would be amazingly frustrating to be in a situation where it's like you can't win. And it really paid off in the future, like as a SEAL, having to constantly be faced with what everyone else said was impossible and having to know that there was going to be some way to do it, right? Some way to get it done. I would say my feet would be dry for the first 15 minutes of the day, and that was it for an entire day. And so when you had blisters, they just keep getting bigger and bigger because the only time they get to kind of dry out was at night. So I got to the point where every morning I would wake up and I would take one of those plastic iodine brushes and I would scrub the blisters until they were bright red and bleeding because infection was what I was worried about. Then I would fill the hole that was the blister with super glue. So I'd try and super glue as much as I could, like just cover it in super glue. Then I would tape it, and that would keep the sand and the salt water out of it for most of the day. And then eventually the super glue would crack. And so then at the end of the day, when I would get back to the room, I would then take the same iodine brushes and scrub all of the super glue out until it was bright red and bleeding, and then leave it open for the night and then do the same thing in the morning. It was incredibly painful. By the time Hell Week started, I could put the first knuckle of my pinky finger in the hole that was in the inside of my ankle, and it never healed. It wasn't for, if it hadn't been for the walk week after Hell Week, they would have never healed. Like they just keep getting worse and worse. And it isn't bad enough to cause a medical drop as long as I don't get infection. So I go to the medical thing, and they're like, yeah, you got blisters, too bad. Like, yeah, until they get infected, there's nothing we can do about it.
You know, when it comes to being joyful and being uplifted, and in terms of that conversation that you're part of or that you hear sometimes that just leaves you kind of buzzing or feeling really empowered. I thought that this episode in particular with Mike Westerdal and Pastor Chris Stevens absolutely fit that to a T. It was an episode simply called Fear Not. And this is a really, really cool conversation, and I would encourage you to go back and listen to the whole episode. Episode 236 with Pastor Chris Stevens, Fear Not.
What do you think the most common command is in the Bible? We'll give you a second. Some Jeopardy music.
I was going to say.
Maybe the editor could add some Jeopardy music in right here. And then some common ones you might think of, right? Like love your neighbor, love people.
Right.
Love would be one. What's another one?
Avoid pride.
Avoid pride. It's like the sin that seems to lead to all the other sins. Seems like it was the original sin.
Yep.
And
let your light shine. Right? There are all kinds of things that we know we're supposed to do that we are consistently communicated in Scripture, but there is one.
There is one, and it's mentioned 366 times.
That's exactly right. It transcends all the others.
All right, go ahead. Let the cat out of the bag.
Fear not.
Right. It's
Fear
the episode
not.
name. You should have been able to guess that one, right?
Fear not. It is 366 times. So as one writer said, it's one for every day of the year, including leap year. God included that. So it's easier said than done.
All right. So why do you think this is? I mean, I'm sure you could talk like an hour on this alone, but why is it mentioned so often compared to the other commands?
Well, I think it's because there really isn't anything that is as contradictory or contrary to the life of faith as fear. It's when we fear, we doubt, right? We're plagued by those what if questions. What if I wreck? What if I fall? What if I fail? And so if those what if questions are overpowering us, then we aren't going to live by faith. We're going to submit to that fear. I think God doesn't want us to fear because in fear we lose our joy. And you know, why is joy so important? Because the Scripture says the joy of the Lord is our strength. And so if we are living in fear, we are discouraged. The Scripture exhorts us to encourage each other, right? So it's giving us heart. But when we're living in fear, we've lost that joy. We are forfeiting God's power for the victorious, flourishing life that He envisions for us. I would challenge anyone, if you're not a believer and you're just wondering, you're thinking, maybe I'll try it. I'll see if God can help bring about the abundant life that He promises, which we know is found in Jesus first. But I would challenge any of the listeners today to open the book of Proverbs. There are 31 Proverbs. That means there's a proverb, one chapter for each day of the month, 31. And the book of Proverbs it's essentially axioms to live by. They're not promises. They aren't things that God says this is going to happen every time. But I tell you what is I have discovered about the Proverbs is that 95% of the time, the way God says it should go is the way it's going to go. So if you choose to live by the axiomatic teaching of the Proverbs, then what you're doing is taking a step of faith to meet God, who, by the way, is pursuing you, right? So you meet God in the material world, because that's what Proverbs are about. How do we interact with other people? How do we run our business? How do we control our tongues and manage our anger? All those things are in the Proverbs. And so I would just say, try it. take 31 days, read through the book of Proverbs, and every day, I guarantee you'll see something in whatever chapter you're reading that helps you understand that our Heavenly Father, spiritual God, He is spirit, has a plan that if we stay in His lane, we will meet with joy and effectiveness in pretty much whatever we do.
3 more highlighted episodes remaining here on our most memorable. This one I would classify as the most disgusting or the grossest conversation of the year. There's always one of those, right? Every year here on Strong by Design, I feel like, if we're talking holistic health or anything in that category. And this one with Michael Biamonte definitely satisfies that. Episode 216, Overgrowing Fungus That Lives in All of Us. Check this one out.
The primary reason why they had crazy reactions to the vitamins was because they had candidiasis. And for those of you who don't know what that is, candidiasis is an overgrowth of a fungus in your intestinal tract, which is normally there, but only in small amounts. The fungus is called Candida albicans. And when Candida albicans grows to become a more dominant part of your flora, rather than a subdominant part, it does strange things because it releases alcohols into your body. It releases mycotoxins, which are toxins from yeasts and funguses, which adversely affect your nervous system. Then that led me on the pathway of discovering how to handle Candida, because we had all these people coming to us to go on this program, and what was barring them is the fact they had an overgrowth of Candida. So I kept sending them to different doctors, hoping some doctor would be able to cure them, and nobody could. So I took it upon myself then to figure out how to unravel how you handle Candida, and that and what's come from that is my book, The Candida Chronicles, which you can get on Amazon, which explains my journey, my sojourn into understanding Candida and unraveling the mystery of Candida. Why it's a mystery is because Candida causes so many different symptoms. It could cause as much as maybe 150 different symptoms, and it affects everybody differently depending on your genetics. And it's because it's a fungus. It can flip itself. Technically, it's an organism which is called dimorphic, which means 2 lives. It can switch from a fungus to a yeast to a fungus to a yeast, back and forth. It's the same organism that causes vaginal yeast infections and jock itch in men, but it's also in the intestinal tract. It becomes a fungus and it causes gas, bloating, all kinds of digestive problems. It can cause asthma. It can cause a condition called leaky gut syndrome, which is known as intestinal permeability, because the organism actually grows roots looking for sugar. So it pierces your own little capillaries in your blood vessels in your intestines, which causes a leaky gut. That allows things that normally would never be allowed to enter your bloodstream to just go right in. And that causes a whole cascade of inflammation. So it's a fascinating organism in what it can do. It's very similar to cancer in a way, because sugar feeds it and makes it multiply. It literally grows into your tissues. It permeates into your tissues. It suppresses your immune system. It's not cancer, but it has very similar properties in terms of how it works.
It increases fatigue, right? It alters mood.
When you get Candida, the first thing you'll feel normally is you're sluggish, you're tired, and you start to have cognitive problems. Your memory starts to go. You don't remember things. Then you'll start getting gas, bloating, burping, all types of digestive problems. Then as it continues to go on, you start getting inflammatory problems. You may develop asthma. You develop skin rashes. Then when it comes to the point where you develop the leaky gut, now you become what we used to call a universal reactor, which is somebody who literally can't even leave their house because they react to the pollution. If they go to a party where there's cigarette smoke or perfume, they react to that. They get headaches. They can't walk down the aisle in the supermarket where you have your cleaning solutions. The odors just kill them.
Unbelievable.
And this is when you think about all these different symptoms, Also, how it affects your reproductive system, because it lowers hormones, it causes infertility, it does all these things. Now, this one organism is causing all of these things. Person has rheumatoid arthritis, they have asthma, they have allergies. You know, if they're a woman, their menstrual cycle is all over the map, and it's all from this one organism, which is just creating chaos in their biochemistry, and it gets overlooked. No one would ever think. So doctors tend to treat all the symptoms in a candida patient individually, rather than going after what the cause is. That's what makes it fun. Plus the fact that it's highly affected by toxic metals. So if you have a child, let's say, who genetically has the MTHFR gene problems, or he's genetically a bad detoxifier, he gets the vaccinations, right? So he gets thimerosal into his body, which is the mercury preservative that was put in the vaccines that is involved with autism. This kid now develops candida, and he now has mercury toxicity. This is why, as we're both shaking our heads, this is why it's such a fascinating study, because it's this one thing that would cause so many different symptoms that always gets overlooked because nobody thinks, because the symptoms are so random.
And it all starts in the gut. You know, I was really fortunate and honored to meet just an amazing gentleman by the name of Horst Schulze, the co-founder and president of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company. I got to have breakfast with this man and then sit in the very front row and listen to his presentation for over an hour. And he was an absolute joy. And then I was able to get him on the Strong by Design podcast, which just took it to a whole new level. So if you're looking for some wisdom in life, how to succeed, how to be excellent in anything that you do, you have to listen to this episode. But here's just a taste of what the amazing Horst Schulze had to say in episode 259, Excellence Wins in a Time of Mediocrity.
After I insisted I want to work in a hotel, they inquired, what does it mean to grow in a career in a hotel? The first day getting there, I was introduced to the general manager together with my mother. And he said, now, understand, the guests here are very important, ladies and gentlemen, which my parents said, we could never go there. So, the guest is a hotel for fine ladies and gentlemen. And it was clear in our mind we were not. No. So, and the general manager said, "We now behave yourself accordingly, and you all are here to serve those ladies and gentlemen. You're here to learn how to do this." And so, yeah, okay. Next, I'm meeting the maitre d', the head waiter of the hotel, who actually I work under, And he said, now, in very few sentences, he changed my life. Now, let me make clear, at the time I didn't understand what he said. But he looked at me and said, now tomorrow, show up at 7 o'clock. If I meant 1 minute after 7, I would tell you so. Now, he wanted to establish standards, exactness, all those things at the same time. And, okay, I knew I had to be there at 7. That's all I knew out of that sentence at the time. And then he said something very strange that I really didn't understand. And don't come to work. Come here to be excellent in what you're doing and create excellence. Excellence, I knew I had to wash dishes, clean floors, and so on. What could be excellent about that? But, very honestly, he was a human being of excellence. I have met very few in my life like it. For a second here, what is excellence? Excellence is the result of high intent and high work and hard work. If you intend a 5, you will never accomplish an 8. But he, unlike anybody, had high intent in everything he did. In everything he did. His intent was not to serve food. His intent was to make people feel well. Know what the customer wants. It's not about you. Know what the customer wants. Know where you want to take the company. What is your vision? Is the vision good for all concerned? Is it truly good for the employees? Then select employees to join you. How much rhetoric do you hear now? We can't find employees. It's rhetoric. There are plenty of people out there. The problem is they don't want to work for you. How about creating a company where people want to work for you and invite people to join you, not for the function. We all, and this, let's think about that for a moment. It's nearly immoral. I said all the time, it nearly is. We hire people to fulfill a certain function. But guess what? The chair on which we're sitting is fulfilling a function, but we are hiring human beings. And so we learned not to hire for function anymore, but to offer to join our beautiful dream of becoming the best in the world. But tell them how they will benefit from that dream. Opportunity, respect, honor, defining ourselves as the best together. So offering a job and bring them in, and that's what we learned. And of course, having the right process management, continuous improvement of process.
And the final one, the final featured or highlighted episode of the year, goes to a third time guest on Strong by Design. The third time we've had this guest. He's one of my all-time favorite people in the world. I've told him that. So this is not breaking news for him. He's a return guest on the show for a reason, because he's just an amazing kingdom-minded gentleman. And I consider him to be an absolute mentor of mine. His name is Dr. Frank Turek, and I had an episode with him earlier in the year, episode 238, titled Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. And he wrote, this is based on his book by the same title. We had a very inspiring and motivating conversation, and I'm, as you can tell, a huge superhero fan if you look behind me. And so I found this conversation just to be fantastic. So enjoy Dr. Frank Turek.
Yeah, Michael Mansour on September 29th, 2006 was operating in Ramadi, Iraq. He was standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he was standing in front of a doorway to this roof. And he has two Navy SEAL colleagues lying at his feet in the sniper-prone position. They've already been attacked with AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. And his two colleagues lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" Now, I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush gave Mansour's parents Mansour's Medal of Honor posthumously. And he couldn't even hear the citation without crying, the president. Since then, Mansour's high school has turned their stadium into Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. They have the golden trident insignia in the center of the field. And just in January of 2019, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, one of the newest guided missile destroyers in the fleet. Now, they did all this because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. So I always ask people, Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. Would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. And so we spent some time in Hollywood Heroes giving evidence that, yay, God exists, number one. And number two, Jesus did rise from the dead to prove he is God. And of course, then number three, by trusting in him, you can not only be forgiven, you can be given his righteousness. And so much of what Michael Monsoor did in real life is actually exhibited. Of course, it was exhibited in real life by Jesus as well. Except whereas Monsoor died for his friends, Jesus not only died for his friends, he died for his enemies. He sacrificed himself. But so many of these other heroes, superheroes, and fantasy figures, that's what they do. And they all point to the greatest story ever told, the story of Jesus.
You mentioned J.R.R. Tolkien a little bit earlier with Lord of the Rings, which is, if you have not watched the Lord of the Rings movies or the Hobbit movies,
where have you been?
Where have you been? It's one of the best movie sagas I've ever seen in my life, and the character development and stuff is so great. One of the greatest books and movie series ever. There's so many great heroes with the character traits of Jesus, and Tolkien convinced the legendary British writer C.S. Lewis that Christianity was the true myth, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show. What does that mean, the true myth?
Well, before Lewis was a Christian, he was an atheist, and then he was kind of moving a little bit toward theism, and he always loved stories of dying and rising gods. Most of these came after Christianity, and at one point, Tolkien, who was in a group called the Inklings with Lewis, where these writers would get together, these British writers would get together, I guess, once a week and just, talk and fellowship. At one point, Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, said to Lewis, Jack, that was what they called him, Jack, why are you so enthralled with all these dying and rising god myths, except when you read about something like this in the New Testament? You're not enthralled with it then. And it got Lewis thinking, and Tolkien said to him, you're enthralled with these myths, but you're not enthralled with the true myth. This is the one that really happened, that Jesus really did die and rise from the dead. It's an historical fact you can check into. So you ought to believe in the true myth. All these other myths are just pointing to the true myth. And Lewis did check into it, as you know, and then he became probably the greatest apologist of the past 100 years.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. 11 featured episodes in a very memorable year on Strong by Design. In fact, it was a year we've seen the most growth ever on this podcast. We were like 60% growth compared to the previous year, 60% over the previous year. We're crushing our numbers month in and month out. We have consecutive months of PRs, as we call it here, or personal bests, personal records. And that's a great thing. That means that our podcast is reaching more people and touching more lives and changing people, hopefully for the better. We honestly believe that you are strong by design. You are created by our Creator, strong by design. And then you have the ability every day that you wake up and put 2 feet on the ground to live your life strong by design. I take great pride in this podcast, being one of the hosts, and get to manage it. And it's a ministry and a way for us to give back. And we just look forward to an amazing year here in 2023 to have more meaningful conversations with people of all walks of life from all over the world. And we can reach people all over the world with these conversations. So we just thank you so much for following us and for listening. And God bless you. And we'll see you again next week here on Strong by Design.
Thank you so much for listening to the Strong by Design podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe so that more people can find out about our show. Plus, you don't want to miss any future episodes with the amazing guests and topics we have lined up for you.